The wind howled across the open plains like a wounded creature, dragging long ribbons of snow through the twilight air. A lone wagon rolled slowly toward the edge of a rugged settlement, its wheels half buried in frozen mud. Inside sat a young woman named Evelyn Hart, once a seamstress in the distant town of Abilene, now dressed in a patched wool coat that had seen better winters. Her hands, red and cracked from cold, clutched a small wooden box, the only thing she owned that wasn't for sale. It held a few needles, a thread spool, and a folded photograph of a family she hadn't seen in years. When her father died and the tailor shop closed, the world stopped feeling warm. She'd heard rumors of work in the far frontier, a mining camp, a lumber mill, and a ranch looking for someone who could cook for the men who barely remembered what home-cooked food tasted like. That was all she had left, a rumor and a heartbeat. As she reached the wooden gates of Redstone Ridge, a small frontier town carved into the wild, the sound of hammers, hooves, and howling dogs met her ears. She stepped down from the wagon, her boots sinking into the icy slush, her breath visible in the dying light. "Name," barked the old gatekeeper, his beard rimmed with frost. "Evelyn Hart," she said softly, her voice trembling from exhaustion. "I'm looking for work. I can sew, or cook." The man gave her a slow look, then pointed toward a low building at the far end of the main street, a wooden tavern with smoke curling from its chimney. "Try the Iron Spur Inn. They need help. But don't expect kindness here. Not from anyone." Evelyn nodded, her eyes scanning the strangers passing by, prospectors, ranchers, women in rough coats, children carrying buckets of coal. There was no laughter here, only survival. The wind tugged at her bonnet as she made her way toward the inn, its swinging doors creaking like a warning. Inside, warmth hit her face, a rare, precious thing, and she felt her knees weaken from relief. But before she could speak, the room fell silent. Every eye turned toward her, the outsider. The one who didn't belong. And that was when she first saw him, standing at the far corner of the bar, arms crossed, hat low over his eyes. A man with a scar down his cheek and a gaze that could cut through steel. His name, she would later learn, was Calder Boone, a rancher and former gunslinger with a heart colder than the winter wind. He didn't smile, didn't speak. He simply looked at her, the kind of look that made you want to run, but couldn't. Evelyn swallowed her fear and approached the innkeeper. "Sir," she said softly. "I heard you're looking for help in the kitchen." The innkeeper eyed her up and down, then nodded toward the back room. "If you can cook better than my last girl, you've got a place here. Start tomorrow. And don't mind Calder," he added, jerking his head toward the silent cowboy. "He don't believe in kindness. Not anymore." The next morning, frost glittered across the rooftops like shards of broken glass. Evelyn woke before dawn, her hands numb as she stoked the inn stove. The scent of coffee, bacon grease, and wood smoke filled the room as she moved about with quiet grace. She had worked kitchens before, back in Abilene, when she was still the seamstress's daughter. But this was different. These men weren't customers. They were survivors, miners, trappers, cowhands, each one worn by loss and hardship. They ate in silence, spoke little, and left their plates half-finished. Still, Evelyn cooked for them as if they were kings, because it was the only way she knew to fight the emptiness inside her. By noon, the sun had burned through the clouds, turning the snow into a blinding mirror. Evelyn stepped outside to breathe, her shawl pulled tight. That's when she saw Calder again, out by the stables, fixing a broken fence. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing weathered arms marked with scars and dirt. His movements were sharp, efficient, angry. Every nail he drove into the post seemed aimed at some invisible ghost. She stood watching him for a moment, the rhythm of hammer and breath strangely calming. But then he looked up, eyes dark under the brim of his hat. "You got something to say, Miss Cook?" His voice was gravel, deep and edged. Evelyn startled. "No, I was thanking you. For the firewood you brought earlier. I didn't bring it for you," he said flatly, returning to his work. "I don't do favors." She wanted to reply, to say something sharp, but stopped. Instead, she turned and went back inside, cheeks burning with humiliation. Yet that night, as she watched the fire crackle in the hearth, she caught herself wondering what kind of man would look so cold and yet carry firewood for someone he claimed not to care about. Outside, the storm thickened. The wind rattled the windows. And somewhere out in the dark, Calder Boone leaned against the fence post, staring at the inn's faint glow. His jaw clenched as he muttered to himself, "Don't get close, Boone. You're not made for kindness." But even he didn't believe it anymore. 3 days later, the blizzard rolled down from the mountains, a white beast swallowing the frontier whole. The wind screamed through Redstone Ridge, slamming doors, tearing down signs, and burying the world in snow. Inside the Iron Spur Inn, Evelyn worked tirelessly beside the crackling stove, her cheeks flushed red from the heat. She stirred stew in a heavy iron pot, humming softly, the tune faint and warm amid the chaos outside. The door burst open, and snow rushed in like smoke. Calder Boone stepped inside, his coat covered in frost, hat dripping, face grim. He had been out helping ranchers save their cattle from the storm. His hands were bleeding where the rope had cut them, his eyes hard with exhaustion. Evelyn rushed over. "You'll freeze to death if you stay out any longer." He ignored her, stomping the snow from his boots. "I'm fine." But she wasn't convinced. Without another word, she grabbed a towel and hot water from the kettle. "Sit," she said firmly, her tone surprising even herself. "You can glare all you want, but you're bleeding all over my clean floor." For the first time, he didn't argue. He just sat, silently, as she tended to his hands. Her fingers brushed against his skin, rough, scarred, strong. Under the dim lantern light, she noticed a deep mark running along his wrist, a half-healed wound that looked like it had once been far worse. "What happened here?" she asked softly. He stared at the fire. "Used to work cattle. There was a stampede years ago. I lost my brother that day. Rope burned so deep it never healed right." She froze. The words hung in the air like frost. She didn't know what to say, only that behind his silence, behind his sharp edges, there was pain carved deep into his bones. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He shook his head. "Don't be. Sorry don't change the past." Still, his voice wasn't as hard as before. There was something fragile in it, something that felt almost like surrender. Evelyn tied the bandage gently, careful not to hurt him. For a moment, their eyes met, and neither could look away. Outside, the storm howled louder, but inside, a strange quiet filled the room, the kind that comes only when two broken people recognize the same kind of hurt in each other. That night, Calder didn't leave. He sat by the fire until dawn, while Evelyn dozed off in a chair, the lamp flickering beside her. When morning came, the storm had buried the town in white silence, and two steaming mugs of coffee sat waiting, one for him, one for her. It wasn't kindness, not yet. But it was something close. As the weeks passed, the winter began to soften. Icicles dripped from the eaves of the inn, and the first hint of spring teased the horizon. Evelyn had found her rhythm, cooking meals, mending clothes for the ranch hands, and humming songs that reminded the men of homes they'd long forgotten. She had become part of Redstone Ridge's heartbeat, even if she didn't realize it. And Calder Boone, well, he had started to linger more often. He would show up in the evenings, pretending he came for coffee or a repair job at the inn. But everyone knew he stayed because of her. He'd sit at the corner table, arms crossed, hat shadowing his eyes, listening quietly as she worked. Sometimes he'd fix a broken hinge or carry water barrels without being asked. Evelyn would pretend not to notice, but she did, every time. One evening, she caught him outside, trying to fix a broken shutter that had been flapping in the wind all day. "You don't have to do that," she said, stepping out with a shawl over her shoulders. He shrugged. "Noise was bothering me." She smiled faintly. "Or maybe you just can't stand seeing something broken." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "Maybe." The air between them thickened. For a long moment, neither spoke. The moonlight fell across his face, catching the faint silver of his scar, and for the first time, Evelyn thought he looked less like a ghost of pain and more like a man trying to remember what peace felt like. "You ever think about leaving this place?" he asked quietly. "Every day," she admitted. "But where would I go? The world out there isn't much kinder." He nodded. "That's the truth." They stood in silence, listening to the soft creak of the wooden beams, the wind whispering through the pines. Then he said, almost reluctantly, "You cook good. Reminds me of my mother." It wasn't much, but coming from him, it was everything. Evelyn smiled, her eyes glimmering. "Thank you, Mr. Boone." He hesitated. "Calder. Just Calder." From that night on, something changed between them. He began showing her how to ride the horses properly, how to shoot if she ever needed to defend herself. She, in return, patched his shirts, cooked his favorite stew, and filled his silent evenings with laughter. Redstone Ridge, once cold and gray, began to feel alive again. But kindness, in the Wild West, was a dangerous thing, fragile as a flame in the wind. And both of them knew it couldn't last forever without a fight. Spring arrived like a quiet miracle. Snow melted into clear streams that ran through Redstone Ridge, and the scent of pine and wet soil filled the air. The town shook off its cold shell, and with it, Calder Boone began to change too. His shoulders no longer carried the same ghostly heaviness. He laughed now, quietly, as though afraid the world might punish him for it. He would visit the inn each morning, bringing wildflowers or venison, sometimes saying nothing at all, just sitting across from Evelyn as she worked. It was enough, it was everything. But one evening, as the sun dipped low behind the buttes, a rider came into town. A man from Calder's past, Jeb Holloway, an outlaw with whiskey in his veins and revenge in his heart. The two had once ridden together before Calder left that life behind. Now Jeb wanted him back, or dead. "You got soft, Boone," Jeb sneered outside the saloon. "Trading bullets for biscuits, huh?" Calder didn't rise to the bait. "Ain't looking for trouble, Jeb. Trouble found you anyway." Jeb drew his gun. The town froze. Evelyn ran from the inn, her apron still on, eyes wide. Calder. The gunshot echoed through the valley like thunder. When the smoke cleared, Jeb was on his knees, clutching his arm. Calder's shot had been clean, deliberate. He'd spared the man's life. But blood ran down his own shoulder, a grazing wound that bled fast. Evelyn rushed to him, trembling. "You fool," she whispered, pressing her hands against the wound. "You could have died." He winced, his breath shallow. "Would have been worth it, if it meant you'd never have to." Her eyes filled with tears, not from fear, but something deeper. "Don't you say that." He reached up, his calloused fingers brushing her cheek. "Evelyn, you mended more than shirts here. You fixed me. And I don't know how to say this right, but..." She silenced him with a touch to his lips. "Then don't say it. Just stay." Behind them, the sunset bled across the sky, a painting of fire and forgiveness. He smiled through the pain. "Guess I finally believe in kindness after all." Months later, Redstone Ridge bloomed like it hadn't in years. The inn was busier than ever. Travelers spoke of the woman who made the best coffee west of the Rockies, and the quiet cowboy who fixed fences and hearts alike. Evelyn and Calder had turned the old inn into something more than a place to eat or sleep. It had become a home, for them, for anyone who wandered in tired, hungry, or lost. Sometimes, in the cool evenings, they would sit together on the porch. She'd sew by lantern light, and he'd whittle bits of wood into tiny shapes, a bird, a star, a horse. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of memories, forgiveness, and a love that had survived winter's cruel breath. One night, a storm brewed again, soft rain tapping on the roof, thunder murmuring far away. Evelyn looked up at him and smiled. "Still think kindness is weakness?" He chuckled low, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Reckon it's the strongest thing a man can have." She leaned her head against him, her eyes half closed. "Then promise me something. Anything. When the world turns cold again, don't shut it out." He kissed her forehead gently. "Not if you're beside me." And as the firelight flickered across their faces, the old pain in his eyes finally faded, replaced by something fierce, gentle, and real. The seamstress who became a cook, and the cowboy who didn't believe in kindness, had found what they'd both been searching for. Not salvation, not redemption, but home. Outside, the wind carried laughter through the pine trees, soft and endless. The Wild West would remember their story, not for its gunfights or dust, but for the rarest thing found on its frontier, a love that healed more than it hurt.